Good morning, everybody. Had a little bit of technical difficulties getting it to connect. That was a little bit weird. Oops, I forgot to turn this on. There we go. Good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Milko's application team, doing our DesignShop Talk today. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube, so if you have questions, type them in on the chat. I've got another monitor set up over here that I try to keep track of what questions might come in. So if you see me staring off into space off to the left, that's what I'm looking at. So I will start with the questions that were sent in ahead of time, and we will go from there. Let me make sure. Yep, Facebook is up, as is YouTube. Yeehaw. Okay, excellent. All right, so let's see, what do we have? When a design is digitized, is it possible to go in and change pull comp density? Basically, can I change some properties? Absolutely. So first off, it depends on how was it digitized. That's kind of the first question. Is it native to DesignShop? So is it in wireframe format or is it an expanded format? Wireframe format means essentially it was done in DesignShop fundamentally, but what it is it's a shape with properties applied to it, right? So I've got this wireframe shape here, and then we have all these properties that set how the stitches are generated. So what's nice about the wireframe, when you scale it up and down, you do stuff to it, it recalculates everything to keep those properties the same. So your stitch count changes as you're manipulating it. So for instance, if I change the wireframe, it's going to move the stitches because it's recalculating it to fit that border. Okay, so changing here is pretty simple, right? I just select the object you want to modify. You go into the properties, density. If I want more stitches, I decrease the density. If I want a different stitch angle, I can change it here, right? So I can change it by number, or let's say you're not a number type person, you're a visual with the stitch direction. Well, there's these 4 icons right here are your editing ones. So that adds holes, that adds splices. This guy right here is insert stitch direction. So select the shape, click on that, and now see my stitch direction is now solid instead of that dashed line. So now I can drag this around however I want the stitches to go. And if I turn it onto 3D, it might be easier for you to see. But you'll see it's changing the stitch direction however I move this guy around. So, depending on if you're a visual or if you're a numbers type person, work with what works best for you. Okay. Now that's if this is pull compensation is similar. So you go into the properties and under compensation, you can add offset. And I'm going to add way too much. Don't use numbers like this, but just to show you, it's over stitching the shape so that when it allows for that shrinkage, because embroidery is going to shrink a little bit, it'll end up where you want. Now, is 10 the right number? Absolutely not. 1 to 3 is plenty. Probably 1 to 2, quite honestly. Okay. So now, what happens if you send it out and you get an expanded format? What are your options there? Okay, so expanded options are a little bit different. You can still make some manipulations. So for instance, on this bird, if I right click on it and go to property, if I go to scale, right click scale, excuse me, here are some of the things you can do with it. So I can add some pull compensation. So let's say, I don't know, 2 points. Lock, it does it both in X and Y, so it can add a little bit of pull compensation there. Down here, you can modify its density. For the fill, pull compensation here. Notice, here I'll put 10 again. Notice, again, it does the same sort of thing. It's overcompensating the shape by that 10 points. So, I always go to properties, scale. So that's where you adjust it there. Now, can I go backwards? Yeah, so I can even do the -10 and then the -2. Scale. To go back to what I had before. All right. Density-wise, you can modify some of that down here. Your fill density, you can change its percentage, and that will add or remove stitches depending on what you want. So yeah, you can make some changes with it just using that scale. And that works for all of the elements, right? So select what you want to modify, go to scale. If it's expanded, it's expanded because it says here, it's not wireframe based. Whereas if it were wireframe based, I would see this sort of detail, the type of element that created it. Okay. Was that before I jump to one of the YouTube questions? Yeah, so I covered that. Cool. So on YouTube, can you explain how to achieve color gradients with DesignShop? Yeah, so gradients are fun. Let's see. Let me open one to show you that you guys have some examples that you can play with. So down here under this thing, you've got custom designs, and then you got shapes. Right here is a filled shape. So if I drag that guy up and put it there, you'll see I've got a gradient. All right. Why do I like showing this? It's because it's just to show you that you have something you can study, and if you forget or you're looking for some additional details. So what you'll see this guy is it's basically a full fill for the bottom, and then it adds a blend over top, right? So how was this blend created? Well, let's see how it was done. So if I go into the properties, so select the element, go to properties, and you'll notice under effects, right here is that custom density. That custom density is what's going to allow you to change how that blend looks, whether it's going in reverse, so it's more dense up here. If you tell it to go normal this way, if you change it to a convex or a concave, notice what that did. That made it dark on the ends and light in the middle. And here's kind of fun. I always turn on auto apply when I'm doing blends, so I can drag this around to look at it and see what changes are being made real time. You can add points to this, and modify how the blend looks. And I'm a very visual person when it comes to blending, so I always do it with this and with auto apply on, so I can drag stuff around and see what I get. And of course, we can always reverse it too. So there's ones that are built in, exponential, concave, wave, but all of them, let's say one's close but not exact, well, you can add points and move it around. Drag it around. Let's say you want to do multiple color blends, right? So let's say we got that. So that's going from dark blue to the light down here. Well, I can copy and paste this shape. Copy, paste, and go into the properties. Go to effects, turn off reverse. And I should let me go back. Good morning, everybody. Let's start from scratch. Copy, paste, go into the properties, and go into effects, turn off reverse. Give it a different color, and now I got a 3-color blend going. See that? Not 3 very good colors, but 3 colors nonetheless. What would look prettier? Not that. Oh, and then let's say I did that and I went, well, it's too much. Well, I can drag this around to get different looks, and these colors are not good together. But, I mean, you get the idea. Okay, so you can get kind of a tweedy look. If I turn off 3D, you'll see it a little bit better, right? Anyway, so there's a lot you can do with blending it. It's just a matter of playing with it and test sewing it, making sure, let me make sure Melko's not texting me. Okay, it's not. So when you're doing color blending, we did get you some links to how to shade fills, and there's some really good article that Nate wrote quite a while back now on the blog, and I think that's linked somewhere as well, that talks about the right color selections and things like that to make it look really pretty. So, I mean, creating this on your own, like this, I pulled from a sample shape, but it's the same thing. So if you're going to draw a shape, I can draw my shape. I can select it, go into the properties, go into effects, turn on custom density. And when you're using the custom density, it's generally better to turn this off and do manual of some sort. And now I have one of my colors, right? Notice these edges aren't nice and clean, right? So if you want to clean that up, if you're putting a border on it, it's kind of a who cares, it might get covered anyway, but maybe you want that, instead of having that short stitch or that drag to the next line, you want to have a short stitch, turn on Trapunto. That'll make everything go to the edge before it turns. Okay? And even more fun, you can also tell it to trace the border. So not only is it's nice and boxy that way. Creates a, I'm blurry. It looks clear here and on the stream that I can see separately. So it might be your internet connection. I know depending on where you're watching, you're on YouTube. So I know YouTube will downsample and do different things based on what your connectivity is. So that might be part of it. But check out the articles we pointed to you on color blending. It's a lot of fun. Okay. And don't forget, you got these cool tools down here that if you ever forget, you can study them and see how it's done. Okay. Thank you guys all for joining today. So I did all the questions so far. I'm looking to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, cool. Whoa, what am I dragging now? There we go. All right, back to this. All right. Excuse me. Apparently I'm just going to choke today. All right, I'm still using DesignShop 10 instead of 11. You can't figure out how to use or change stitch directions and things like that. This part of your statement confuses me to no end. I feel like version 11 has less options. It's got more. So I'd like to understand what, it might just be reorganized from what you were looking at, but there's a lot more to do in V11 than in V10. So your first question was stitch directions. So let's look at that. So vector manipulation is, a vector is just a shape, right? It's a wireframe. And then you can add points to it and things like that. So you can add points. I can hold the shift key down to change that to a curve. I can hold it to a control key to make it a nice curve, things like that. All right, so once you have a vector, how do you turn it into stitches? Well, the primary difference between a vector and sewing is stitch directions. So right here, again, you select your vector. These 4 buttons, they exist in both 10 and 11. That one inserts a hole, this one inserts splices. These are your stitch directions, and that's your start and stop. If you hold this guy down, you'll see there's more options. You've got the option to do a curved direction line or insert a straight stitch direction. I'm going to start with a straight stitch direction. Left click and drag. That puts that in. When you want to modify it, you can move it around. If you want to add multiple stitch directions, that's cool too. So again, you select your shape, click on the stitch direction line, and you can add additional ones. Oh, I have a shape going that has about 100,000 stitches, so I just angered it. One moment. Let me make a smaller shape. Yeah. I broke it. I clicked too much. Let's try it again. All right. No, I don't want to cover anything. I'm going to draw a reasonable size shape. Okay. So I've got straight stitch directions, which is that guy. If I delete that, it goes back to being a vector. I can hold this guy down and say insert curved stitch direction line, and you can add curved stitch directions through there, and it will warp the stitches in the direction that you have. Okay. You can add multiple ones. So for instance, if I'm using a column 2 and I draw myself a shape and make it worthy of being a, okay. So if I draw that, I can go and add multiple stitch directions along things, and it will again warp the stitches along the direction everywhere I add stitch directions. Okay. And that works, wherever you can add as many or as few. In general, the fewer stitch directions you add, in general, the better. That's not always true, but so I can have kind of this flowing thing going with the stitch directions varying. What else with stitch directions? So we got the curved ones. We've got multiples. Yeah. Oh, here, let's say I take this shape and I add a splice to it. So right here is insert splice, left click and drag. Why? Oh, I didn't select the shape first. You got to select the shape, left click and drag. There we go. That adds a splice to it. that was a straight splice. Well, if I hold this button down, now I have a curve splice. So again, I can now use my left clicks and right clicks and add a curve direction through there. See that? So that'll give me splice lines on there. If I select that and go to properties, let's see, go to properties, you can modify your pull compensation in here. So you can do, and that will get you more overlap along those splices and things like that. Okay. What else? So that, whether you're using vectors or wireframes, you can manipulate them however you want, really. I mean, you can do a ton to them. See that? I can even add points to this after the fact to my splices and move those around and take that curved splice or that straight splice and turn it into a curved. And then you can see how the stitches are kind of warping across in that stitch direction I gave it to start with. Each of these regions, I could actually give a different stitch direction, right? So if I delete this, I'm just showing you different things here. So I can say, all right, let's do a curved stitch direction there. Let's do another one over here. So you can see I'm making it fight. But this one has that one, this one has this one's being governed by that little piece there, but let's say I give it a straight stitch direction there. So you can modify it all around to do whatever you're looking to achieve, okay? Okay, delete that. We have a question typed in. Have you ever done a large bean stitch to look like yarn? Yeah, so... Well, I mean, it kind of depends. If you're going to do a large bean, I would do it with Burmalana personally. But yeah, you can do long stitches. The issue you run into, so let's say you want a really long stitch so it looks like it's hand done. That's cool, except the longer it gets, the more prone it's going to be to snagging, right? So when people wash it or put stuff in pockets, the more likely are there to cause damage. So yes, you can absolutely, let's see. I'm just going to draw that. All right, so if I want this to look more like it was hand done, maybe I make the stitch length 40, and maybe instead of the bean stitchness of 3, I use 5. So what that will, if I'm using 40 weight thread, a 40 point stitch is still small enough where it's probably still fine. And a bean stitch of 5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to put 5 pieces of thread down in each location. You can even try 7. So I routinely will do things with a bean stitch. I'm trying to think what's the most. 3, 6. I use 6 a lot, so I'll do a bean stitch with a retrace that will give 3 out and 3 back. So I use 6 a lot. So I could technically just, instead of doing it 3 with a retrace, I could use 7, and that'll be a little bit bolder. But the larger stitch length will give that a more hand look. Now, another thing you could always try is if you had this set to 3 and you did a retrace, now you can do an offset. So what the offset does is it does three pieces of thread every stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it'll do that all the way until it gets to wherever it's going, right? When it comes back, it's going to do 3 stitches back the whole way. But the offset, it's going to offset the needle penetrations. So rather than going in the same holes, it's going to offset them a little bit. So that can also make it look thicker. But if you're going for the defined, like each individual stitch, you wouldn't want to do that. But it makes it look thicker and more continuous. So I'll use offset a lot just to make it look nice and bold. Now you could also use Burmalana, right? So Burmalana is a thicker thread, so you might not even need to do, you can use longer stitch lengths. The thread is super thick, so you might be able to just get away with a running stitch. That's something you'd have to play with, maybe a running stitch out and back. So 2 pieces of thread the whole way, things like that. But yeah, you can make the stitch length wider. I would caution against anything 40 to 45 is my happy place on running stitches. When you start getting up to 60 and larger, things like that, it tends to start feeling and looking like a basting stitch. So, but that's a personal thing, right? So each of us are going to have a different view on what looks great and what doesn't. So play with it and see what looks good to you. So creates a, does that help? Hopefully it does. Okay. What else do we have? All right, so I showed vectors. Okay. How do we do this? So I kind of showed this already with the curved stitch directions, but that's all this is. This is an open density with stitch directions, with the curved stitch directions. So let me see. I have a file I made. I'll open it. Okay, so let's turn that off, turn that off. So I started this a long time ago of making a ribbon. So I was trying to do a curved thing. And this is the same technique you use for that, for those leaves. It's just using a larger density and then curved stitch directions. Okay, so all of this, that's all these are. It's playing with the stitch direction to get it to look. So I really briefly looked at doing one of the leaves to show you, and I just picked this guy for grins. So it's curved around essentially in a circle around that center, right? So things you play with, stitch length. The default on this is 40. Doesn't look very leafy or very flowy. So you can lower this and that will get you the more definition along it. The stitch direction, notice I kind of just followed along the shape of the element and then moved the stuff around until I liked what I saw. And quite frankly, I just play with it and keep dragging until I get what I'm looking for, right? So you can keep on playing with it until you get the look you want. Maybe I want this to be a little deeper. I can drag that. You know, so you keep just playing with it and you can add that definition, and then maybe it's too close together. Maybe I want 18. Spread it out a little bit more. So those curved stitch directions are a whole lot of fun. You can warp the stitches to suit your needs. See that? So that's all those are, and it's a matter of just playing with it. Ooh, I like that better. That's cool. So you can kind of work through getting the look you want to conform to it. So just like with the ribbon, what I was doing there, that was just, you know, tracing the overall shape, doing the stitch direction, and then I layered another one on top to make it look like it was the sheer part folding over it. And, you know, just doing that until you get the look you're going for. Okay? So hopefully that helps. So it's really just adding those curved stitch directions. So to get to them, remember it's that. Right? So insert curved stitch direction line, and then you can left click and drag, and it will warp the stitches along the direction you want. So you can left click, left click, however you want to create your shape or to create the stitch. And don't forget, you can change the stitch length in the properties. So for this particular fill, so this is a fill, I can change the stitch length. To get more definition, I can add trapunto, I can add trace border, I can play with the density. So if I want more coverage or less coverage. So all of these are things that you can play with. You can even, you know, that affects the density we talked about to begin with. You can even use that as a means of, you know, guiding how those stitches dispense. And that might be good for your leaves, right? So yeah, you can, I liked it better how I had to start with. But anyway, so you can play with that. Do you have a video on how to digitize hats? Hat digitizing is, no, well, I don't per se. I know we have lots of discussions on it. There might be one on Melco's site that discusses it some more. Hat digitizing really is about thinking about what you're doing, right? In general, you always want to sew from the brim up and then center out. So bottom to top, center out. And every design you're going to have to look at a little bit differently, right? So let me go open some hat designs. Let's see. Milko, where's Milko? Yeah, we got a link to a presentation for you in the comments, so that's cool. I'm trying to find hats. Oh, I like that one. Okay, so it's a hat design. So it really boils down to thinking about it. So you saw what the design looks like, right? So the rule of thumb is bottom up, center out. Well, if we just do a redraw on this, let's slow it down. And just say redraw, what do we get? Well, you notice it did all that underlay, and then it went bottom up for the fill. And it's continuing to build up as it goes. The one thing you might have noticed was some of those little techniques it did. Let's go through and turn them on so you can see them. So notice it did this fill in two parts. Why? Right? So it did the side first, so it could go center out, and then it walked back here and did this guy here, so it could go from the center out. So it did the underlay, center out. All right. And then there were these other features here. So notice how it's kind of dealing with the edges. We don't want all that stuff shifting around or not getting covered up, right? So reinforce it all, hold it all still. And then do our fill stitch from the bottom to the top. And that was the fill going bottom up. So it's digitizing for hats is kind of an exercise in just thinking about what you're doing. How do you want to split it up? Where do you want to start? I mean, yes, we want to go center out, but do we want to start on that center seam that has, 4 layers of buckram plus some bias tape and really heavy materials? Do we want to put our very first stitch when the machine is running slow right there? No. You want to start off to the side and run into that seam, right? Because you want the machine to be at full speed. So there are things to think about as you're digitizing for hats, and really just work your way through it. And it's same with the lettering, right? So if I look at just the lettering, I guess I got to turn it on to do that. Again, it's going bottom to top and roughly center out, right? So I always think of digitizing in general as being a puzzle that I'm working through, right? How do I want to get around my object, minimizing my trims, and doing what I need to get a quality design? So we got you a link to Cap Digitizing there, so check that out. Here's another wild design. I love this design. It's just wild to me, but it's the same sort of thing, right? So it's got, you do the underlays, you do center out, and you kind of just build it up as you're going. Some of it has to be on top of other elements because that's what the design looks like. So you're doing your best to just always keep in mind what direction you're pushing things. So what other questions do we have? All right, let's see what else. Okay, so those were all the questions I had ahead of time. Let me quick scan and see if I missed any others. We talked about the bean stitch, talked about hats. Okay. All right, y'all. Those were all the questions I had sent in ahead of time. So next week I'm going to aim for Friday. So see if you've got questions. Get them in. You'll see this kind of header on some of the social medias. So type in whatever questions you have ahead of time. If I need to make little examples, I can find them ahead of time. So that kind of helps. Yeah. I think that is about all I had. I gotta go get tennis elbow looked at. That's fun. I've given myself a arm injury from rowing too much. So that's my fun for the week. So, all right, everyone. you guys have a fantastic weekend. I will be back next Friday. And have fun sewing. Let us know what you want to learn about, and we'll do our best to get it done. All right. Have a good weekend. Talk to you guys later.